Okay, it's story time again, and this one's going to take us all the way back to 1966. It might have been late 65, and I was running pretty wild with a wild group of people, and getting in a lot of trouble. And hey, what's one more piece of trouble? Why not? So we decided we wanted to go to New York. There was three of us. And so, but we didn't have transportation, and we didn't have any money, but I was 17, and I figured, what the hell, we'll figure it out. Well, one of the guys, my buddy, at the time, he he was one of those kind of guys that when he put a nice shirt on and maybe a tie, he looked like regular Joe America. The kind of guy you would just like trust with your car and your daughter at the same time. But he was rotten to the core, like all three of us were. And so he came up with a scheme of how to get transportation back to New York. So he came up with this scheme, and it was pretty brilliant, actually. In those days, 1960s, if you looked reasonable, which I didn't, and neither did my other buddy, but this one guy, Jim, he looked great. He put on a tie, and he went into a car lot, and he says, "Hey, I'm looking to buy a car. I want to take one for a test drive." And in those days, the salesman literally gave you the keys, and you drove the car away and took it for a test drive. So he did that, and he went around the corner to a locksmith, had an extra set of keys made, and took the car back. Now this was a 1964 GTO, 389, 4 on the floor, bucket seats, burgundy red. I mean, this car was the car at that time. And for those of you who know, all of those little markers were, I think he'd even have positive traction rear end. So anyhow, so we go back that night, and he opens the car door. We're kind of scoping that out. It's like 4 in the morning, and he opens the car door. He puts the key in the ignition, starts the engine, and drives it off the lot at 4 o'clock in the morning. Drives it over to my apartment that I was at. We took the license plate off of my 55 Chevy, piece of crap, this 55 Chevy, switched the license plates, and drove away the next morning. And we were like, hey, we were doing great. So, but we needed to make some money. So we decided, hey, let's go to Yosemite. We'll get a job in Yosemite, and we'll make enough money to get across the country. So we drove the car to Yosemite. Oh, by the way, prior to that, I was working in a gas station, and in those days, there were credit cards, and you gave the guy they gave me a credit card. I was the service station guy, and I put it in the old knuckle buster and imprint the card. And then it would take literally 2 weeks for that card to clear. So the credit card company was lagging by 2 weeks. Now we decided that we had 2 weeks to use this one credit card that a customer accidentally left behind and never came back for, and I just put it in my pocket. So we filled up the tank, got, whatever it is that we got and drove to Yosemite. And the three of us just into Yosemite, got jobs. I was working in a gas station. He was working in a hotel. And we worked for literally that whole month. And midsummer, there was all kinds of women, all kinds of parties. I mean, it was a scene. And here we were with a 1964 GTO. Could you imagine? And at one time, actually, the cops pulled us over because, we had a tendency to kind of get into trouble. The cops pulled us over and they, checked our license plate out and checked us out and checked our IDs. And I'm thinking, oh, man, we're busted. This is it. And after about a half hour, they said, okay, we're good. See you later. We drove away. And I was thinking, geez, this is pre-computer days. They had to literally make a phone call to the county, Alameda County, where I lived, to ask if we were legitimate. And for some reason, obviously, they didn't ask if the car was legitimate. And so anyhow, we got away with it, and we continued working in Yosemite. And at the end of the month, we quit the job. We had enough money to get us back to New York, feed us, and we still have this credit card that we hadn't used for that entire month. So we decided, I suggested that we go down to Las Vegas. And this was back when Las Vegas was one little dinky strip, maybe a half-mile long. And the rest of it was desert. So we show up in Las Vegas, and the reason why I went there was because there was this girl that I'd met, and she was staying and living in Las Vegas. So we went there, and I, tried to get into her pants and didn't succeed, of course. It was, at that point, it was, like 90% unsuccessful and maybe 10% semi-successful. But, hey, I was young, I was crazy, life was good. So we, after a couple of days in Vegas, we decided, okay, let's just head for New York. So we roll out into Utah, over into Colorado, and, just dropping this credit card all the way. And we got to, I think it was Provo, Utah, and we decided, okay, this is the time where we got to get rid of the credit card. So I literally cut it in half and threw it in a garbage can. And from that point, we had enough gas to get us to to Denver, Colorado, where my relatives were. So we show up in Denver, Colorado, and the cops are waiting for us. And it's like, what? What happened? And it turns out that the third guy that was with us ended up, his dad was a cop. And he did a little research on us and found out that we'd stolen the car and, the whole mess. So we land in jail in Inglewood, Colorado. And they put us in a cell that was the worst cell that you could think of. I mean, it was like 6 cells. There was 6 guys to a cell. There was a toilet and a sink that was one unit. And it was in this kind of bank vault sort of situation where the 6 cells were lined up and you had a catwalk, and the door that closed off the 6 cells was a big steel kind of a bank vault kind of door. You crank the handle and it opened. And it was pretty brutal. And everybody that was in there was an immigrant that had been busted. and was getting sent back. And there was guys in there for 9 months. So we spent 4 or 5 days in there. Then they carted us off to county, and they dropped us in the middle of this room of maybe 50 guys, and at least 20 of them were badasses. And we were like teenagers, 17 years old, and we just like stood in the corners smiling a lot. And then they took us to it was a county lockup, but it was more of a permanent lockup. And it was kind of like, it was built in the 1800s, and it was kind of like San Quentin, if you've seen movies about San Quentin. I mean, it was 2 guys to a cell, and there was a big, long cell block, and, all of the cells got closed at the same second electronically, and, I mean, it was pretty scary. But me and my buddy, we kind of just hung out together and just hung out there for almost a month before my mom shows up and gets us out of there. Yeah, anyhow, I went to court. I pleaded guilty or no contest. The judge was like, and he finally just said, okay, we're going to put you on probation for 2 years. And if you get in any trouble at all, then you're back in jail. That's fine. So I get out. I get on a plane. I fly back home. I'm like back home, and it's normal. Now, we're going to jump about 5 years from that moment. I had ended up hooking up with a woman that was 10 years my senior. Pretty hot babe, by the way. And she had 3 daughters. And those 3 daughters, because she was a divorcee, she really wasn't that skilled at taking care of, preteens. They were pretty wild. And they got in a lot of trouble. And at one point, the two of the girls went to... Oh, wait, let's back up. Okay, we're going to back up. So 20 years later, I go back to Colorado to a family reunion because most of my father's side of the family is in Englewood, Colorado. And I'm at the reunion, and my aunt comes up to me and says, Nick, I want you to meet this guy. So she takes me over to this older gentleman, and she sets me down and she says, this is Judge such and such. And he shakes my hand and I shake his hand. And, I'm in my 30s or so at that point, and I'm a little more settled. And she says, well, this is the judge that sentenced you during that situation with the car. And I went, wow. So they told me what they did. And you couldn't do that nowadays, but back then, they decided to teach me a lesson. And that they put me and my buddy in the worst cells they could find and moved me from bad cell to worse in all 3 of those cells just to scare us straight. And it worked. I was pretty frightened most of the time, most of the 3 months. And at the same time, they said, okay, we're going to make sure that they're protected so that they don't get harmed. Well, back to my stepdaughters, who at one point, they, as I said, they were pretty wild. They cut school. They sniffed a bunch of glue. They got pretty crazy, and they went and robbed a dairy at gunpoint. And I'm like, whoa. My wife and I were just flabbergasted that they would do that. And I said, well, if it's just something I learned, and this was probably 5, 7, 8 years later, I says, let's go talk to the probation officer. And we sat down with the probation officer that afternoon, and I said, this is what I want to do. I want you to put them in the worst cell you can find, but I want them to be protected. So if you can do that. And she goes, yeah, we might be able to do that. I says, and I want them to not know that we know they're there. And I want them to stay there for 7 days. And I swear those two girls came out of that jail and they never got in another lick of trouble. Now the third daughter, who didn't do that and didn't go to that jail, she got in trouble the rest of her life. Probably still getting in trouble, who knows. So anyhow, it was a lesson for me. But that GTO, man, it was a car to remember. This is Nick Collier checking out.